Hey guys, it's Gary here, legal tip on AKAs. So let's talk about also known as, formerly known as, now known as. We're starting to see a lot of these, and I've had agents ask me, why are we seeing so much, and what do they mean? Why do we have them? So first of all, you're pretty much always going to see an AKA document in a real estate closing because when there's a lender, because the lender has pulled the credit report, and from the credit report, there's a lot of different variations of that consumer's name. So for instance, if you have, they may have your first name, your last name, they may have them mixed together. They may have the middle name before the first name. They may have first name, middle initial, first initial, middle name. They may have your middle name spelled wrong. And so all of those different variations of your name as they appear on the credit report are typically going to be on a document in which the lender asks you to confirm that those in fact are you. Oftentimes when you have a name similar to a parent or another sibling, some of those actually might even come over onto your credit report as well. For instance, if you're the third, some things for the second may show up, or they may have junior when you're the third. And so they're asking you to confirm for credit purposes that those are the different variations of your name. Clients that have found that names such as their father or their brother on their credit can go back to their credit reporting agency and say, hey, that's not me. Can you please remove it? And the agency must take affirmative steps to confirm whether it is or is not you. The second time you're going to see AKA is when you have a seller that now has a different last name than on the name on the deed. So for instance, if they've gotten divorced or married and they had a name change since they purchased a house, then you often will see the AKA or formerly known as. So if Jane Doe bought a house and then she got married and became Jane Roe, on the deed and all the seller documents, you'll see Jane Doe, now known as Jane Roe, or Jane Roe, formerly known as Jane Doe. And that will show up on the deeds and so forth. Now, this is important that you provide this information to the closing attorney. Best practices as a real estate agent would be to ask your seller when you're sitting down at a listing agreement if, in fact, they have had a name change since they took title. If the answer is yes, then all of your documents need to be signed that way, Jane Doe, now known as Jane Roe. And you need to let the seller, the closing attorney know, because when we do the closing, we've already searched Jane Doe because that's what came out on title. And the first we may even hear that they're now a Jane Roe is when they show up at closing with their driver's license. We have to search that person's name as well, because if Jane Roe has a judgment against her, it still would affect her title when she was named Jane Doe. And so we'd have to get those all taken care of. So be sure, if you're working with the seller, to ask that question. Have you had a name change since you bought the house? You also can see it with misspelling or scrivener's errors. My last name is spelled Pickren, but oftentimes people will do ERN, Pickern, I guess. And so if that was misspelled at the courthouse, you would see Gary Pickren, AKA Gary Pickern. And that's not saying that I am the same person necessarily. What it's saying is, for the purpose of this closing, that is the same purpose for that closing. And so that happens where you see letters get transposed, especially when you have really long names that are not common names. People may transpose letters there. Lastly, you can also see it on buyer loan documents, and where you're going to see it here is where a buyer wants to take title in a particular name, but they've signed the loan application using their middle name or whatever. And so we have seen where somebody who never uses their middle name, they took the loan application, first name, middle name, last name, and now when they go to sign, they just want to sign their middle name and last name. They don't want to use their whole name on the deed and so forth. So oftentimes you'll see the deed may have an AKA, and some of the legal documents may have an AKA. So be sure, as best practices before your client applies for the loan, is to make sure they understand whatever name they put on the loan application will be the name that your lender is going to use for all the loan documents, and that's how they're going to have to sign. So that is very important they understand that. All right. Other than that, the other thing we might see is make sure that your buyer's driver's license is the same name. And so if they've gotten married or divorced, their driver's license will match how they're going to take title. All right. Other than that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Don't forget, this is the weekend of 9/11, and wish that you all sit back for a moment, reflect on how you felt, how angry you were, how upset, how miserable that time was, and never forget what happened to the United States, but also never forget that we live in the greatest country in the entire world, and there's not another country in this entire world that would even come close to us or a place you'd want to live. So hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and y'all take care.